Picture a logistics yard right now. I mean, just visualize it.
Right. Lots of noise, lots of action.
Exactly. The diesel pumps are roaring, dispatch radios are just blaring, and drivers are, logging maximum overtime as this massive convoy of 18-wheelers rolls out the gates.
It looks incredible from the outside.
Oh, totally. To anyone driving past on the highway, this company looks like an absolute powerhouse, like an empire, really. But then, this is the crazy part, you step into the owner's office, pull up the bank account at the end of the month, and it is completely empty.
Which is terrifying.
It's worse than empty, actually. It's overdrawn, the trucks are constantly moving, but the business itself is basically starving to death.
It really is a terrifying paradox, yeah. You have this massive adrenaline-fueled illusion of productivity, and it is completely masking a desperate financial reality.
Right.
And, the hardest part for the people inside that building is that the momentum of the daily operations makes it almost impossible to see the cliff they are driving toward.
Yeah, you're just blinded by the motion. Well, welcome to today's Deep Dive. If you're the learner joining us today, you know we love dissecting complex systems.
We really do.
And today we are answering one terrifying question. How can a business be working this hard and still be on the absolute brink of collapse?
It's a question a lot of business owners lose sleep over, honestly.
Definitely. So we have this incredibly pragmatic guide in front of us from Greystride. It is essentially a masterclass on developing a turnaround plan for distressed logistics companies.
It's a fantastic source, very detailed.
Super detailed. And our mission for you today is to extract the exact playbook for pulling a transport business out of a financial nosedive. We want to prove, using this Greystride material, that distress does not mean the end of a business.
And that framing is so crucial. I want to establish right out of the gate that many of the strongest logistics companies globally have faced these exact same difficult, suffocating cycles.
Really? Like
Yeah.
even the big players.
Oh, absolutely. Distress is not an anomaly in the transport sector. It's almost a guaranteed season of the business life cycle given the volatility of fuel and markets.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah.
What determines the outcome isn't the crisis itself. It's how analytically the leadership reacts to it. Because a well-structured plan replaces raw panic with targeted direction.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before a company can be saved, the leaders have to actually realize that it's in danger.
Right. You can't fix what you don't acknowledge.
Exactly. And that brings us to the fundamental difference between looking busy and actually being profitable. I mean, it's like running on a treadmill, right? You're sweating profusely, your heart rate is maxed out, but you are literally going nowhere.
That is the perfect analogy.
The source details the creeping symptoms of failure. Because it's rarely one big explosion, is it?
No, it's almost never a sudden crash. It's a series of quiet compromises.
Yeah, like watching your operating costs rise while your customer rates stay totally flat.
Or a fleet manager deciding to push a truck's maintenance schedule back by just, say, 5,000 kilometers to save cash this month.
Right, just kicking the can down the road. Or paying a key parts supplier 2 weeks late.
Yep.
And my absolute favorite red flag from the text, the growing, palpable tension between the operations team and the financial management team.
Oh, man. That tension is the canary in the coal mine. You can almost hear the arguments echoing in the hallway.
Oh, yeah.
Because operations departments, they're typically measured on utilization. Their core mandate is to keep the trucks moving, keep the clients happy, and clear the yard.
So they just want to dispatch the fleet no matter what.
Exactly. They're shouting to get the trucks on the road. Meanwhile, the finance team is sitting there staring at the spreadsheets, realizing that every time they start the engine on a specific route, the company is actively bleeding cash.
That's insane.
It is. Operations is optimizing for volume, while finance is agonizing over margin.
But here is the question that just jumps out at me. If the yard is that busy, and the trucks are always booked with freight, how do owners miss these warning signs until the absolute last minute?
It's a great question.
I mean, how do you get to the point where you literally need to call the bank for an overdraft just to buy enough diesel to finish the week?
Well, what's fascinating here is that top-line revenue is incredibly blinding. Financial distress in logistics is a slow, quiet erosion.
Blinding how exactly?
Well, an owner might look at the top-line revenue and celebrate billing $1 million this month. They see cash flowing through the accounts and assume they are totally safe.
But they're not.
No, because they aren't looking at the fact that the cost of generating that $1 million was actually, say, $1.1 million.
Ouch. Yeah, that's a problem.
And because the cash cycle in transport is delayed, You pay for diesel today, but the client pays you in 60 days. That deficit just hides in the delay.
Which is exactly why the Greystride guide insists that the very first move isn't a massive strategic overhaul.
Not at all.
It's performing immediate triage to stabilize cash flow. Like step one, stabilize the cash flow immediately, stop the bleeding before you try to fix the underlying disease.
Exactly. The priority is protecting liquidity.
Just having cash on hand.
Right. Liquidity simply means the actual spendable cash you have access to today to keep the lights on.
Because you could have, what, $2 million in outstanding invoices owed to you by clients?
Right, but if you have $0 in the bank and payroll is due on Friday, your business is technically insolvent.
Wow, that's a scary reality check.
It is. The source points out that many logistics companies operate with incredibly limited daily financial visibility. So triage means getting ruthlessly aggressive with your cash position.
What does that look like in practice?
You analyze outstanding customer payments and just start calling clients to accelerate collections.
So you're getting on the phone.
Oh, yeah. And you analyze immediate creditor obligations and figure out who will physically shut your operations down if they aren't paid today.
Right, so you're not fixing the whole broken business model yet. You're just doing triage.
Exactly.
You are tightening credit terms, maybe offering a client a small discount if they pay their invoice in 7 days instead of 30.
Yep. Or calling a supplier to negotiate a payment plan.
Just buying the oxygen the business needs to survive the week.
Because you cannot implement deeper structural improvements if the bank is closing your accounts tomorrow. Cash flow stabilization just buys you the time to think.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because once you have that oxygen mask on, once the immediate cash flow bleeding is temporarily bandaged, you have to figure out why the bleeding started in the first place.
Which is the hard part.
Yeah. And that requires diving into the actual mechanics of the numbers. You have to uncover the ruthless truth of what the source calls the cost per kilometer.
Oh, this is the ultimate metric. It is the absolute pulse of a transport company.
Okay, break that down for us.
If your cost per kilometer exceeds the revenue generated by that kilometer, every single trip your truck takes is quietly destroying your company from the inside out.
That is a brutal way to look at it, but
It's
so true.
To calculate it accurately, you have to capture every single variable and fixed cost and divide it by the total distance traveled.
And the source lists the costs that eat logistics companies alive, right?
Right.
And it's so much more than just the fuel tank.
Oh, fuel is just the tip of the iceberg.
Right, everyone knows diesel is a massive expense.
Mm.
But the Greystride guide highlights these creeping costs that owners often underestimate. Maintenance, repairs, driver allowances, insurance, and the massive overhead of the depot itself.
Exactly.
But, the tires are what really caught my attention.
Oh, the tire wear concept, yes.
Yeah, because a commercial 18-wheeler obviously has 18 tires. You don't buy a new set every day. But every single kilometer that truck rolls down the highway, a microscopic layer of rubber is left on the asphalt.
It's a perfect example.
That is a tangible financial cost happening in real time. If you aren't accounting for that fractional wear and tear in your pricing, you are going to be completely blindsided when you suddenly need to spend tens of thousands of dollars replacing bald tires.
And that fractional accounting is really what separates the surviving companies from the bankrupt ones.
Makes sense.
So once you have a crystal clear breakdown of your true operating costs per kilometer, we move to step 3. You have to hold that number up against your revenue and start asking some incredibly uncomfortable questions.
Like identifying the loss-making operation.
Exactly. Which routes consistently produce losses? Which specific vehicles in the fleet are in the workshop so often that their maintenance costs are wiping out their earnings?
Right.
And perhaps most importantly, which customers demand rock-bottom rates but require high operational complexity? You are basically auditing your entire operation to find the parasites.
Okay, I have to push back here, or at least explore the friction of this strategy.
Sure, go for it.
Let's say I run this audit. I discover that 20% of my routes are losing money, and a massive demanding client who gives me loads every single week is actually unprofitable.
A very common scenario.
Right. The source suggests cutting them. But wait, if I cut my fleet or drop a major client, I instantly lose 20% of my top-line revenue.
Yep.
Meanwhile, I still have a lease on a massive depot. I still have a full dispatch staff. I still have mechanics on payroll. Those fixed overhead costs don't shrink just because I parked a few trucks.
They don't.
Doesn't shrinking the business make it even harder to cover those fixed costs? Doesn't that make the bank even more nervous? I mean, isn't getting rid of trucks admitting defeat?
That is the exact fear that keeps owners trapped in a cycle of losses. It feels completely counterintuitive.
It really does.
But let's look at the actual math of cross-subsidization. The variable costs of running those bad routes, the diesel, the driver overtime, the tire wear, the toll fees, those are consuming massive amounts of cash.
Right, true.
So by running those unprofitable routes, your healthy, profitable trucks are literally subsidizing the losses of the bad ones.
Oh, wow.
The cash you are burning on the road to service that bad client is cash you desperately need to pay your fixed depot overhead.
So by stopping the bad trucks, I actually stop burning the cash that my good trucks are generating.
Yes. The source drops a massive insight here. A smaller fleet operating efficiently generates far better financial results than a massive fleet operating on thin, unsustainable margins.
That's wild.
Yeah.
But it makes perfect sense.
You shrink the top line to save the bottom line. It requires a total paradigm shift. Revenue is vanity, margin is sanity, and cash is reality.
Revenue is vanity, margin is sanity, and cash is reality. I love that. That reframing is brilliant, but man, the courage it must take for an owner to look at a client who fills their yard with freight every single week and realize, I am actually paying for the privilege of hauling your goods.
It takes a lot of nerve.
Which naturally moves us from this internal analysis to taking external action. Once you know the numbers, you can't unsee them. You have to set boundaries.
Exactly. Step 4 is rebuilding pricing and contract structures.
Because transport rates are almost always negotiated under intense psychological pressure, right?
Oh, absolutely. When you have highly expensive trucks sitting idle in the yard, there is this immense, crushing anxiety to just secure work, any work.
Right.
So companies cave. They accept terrible deals that barely cover the cost of diesel just to keep the wheels turning.
It's like setting boundaries in a toxic relationship. Or like running a high-end restaurant, but pricing your premium steaks like fast food burgers just to make sure every table is full.
That's exactly what it's like.
You look incredibly busy, the waiters are rushing around, the kitchen is on fire, but you aren't charging enough to cover the premium ingredients. Eventually, you can't afford to pay the chef, and the whole place shuts down. You have to go back to the customer and say, I can't be your cheap and easy option anymore if you want me to be a reliable partner. You have to be willing to let the bargain hunters walk out the door.
That illustrates the dynamic perfectly. Sustainable transport businesses are built on sustainable pricing. It involves going back to the negotiation table.
Armed with data, I assume.
Yes, you have to present the data to the client and explain that the current rates are structurally unviable. And a massive part of this, according to the Greystride guide, is introducing mechanisms to protect yourself from market volatility.
Yeah, the guide specifically mentions fuel adjustment mechanisms, which, if you're listening to this and running your own business, you're probably wondering how you actually enforce that without losing the client.
Well, a fuel adjustment mechanism is a clause built directly into the contract that automatically scales the billing rate up or down based on a national diesel price index.
Oh, so it's automatic.
Exactly. It transfers the market risk of global oil spikes back to the client. If diesel goes up 10 cents a liter this week, the contract automatically triggers a surcharge on the invoice so the transport company doesn't eat that variance.
You are insulating your margin from external shocks.
Precisely.
But you can't just hike your prices, demand fuel surcharges, and expect clients to happily stay right. If you want premium rates, you have to look under the hood of your own operations and fix the inefficiencies that are driving your costs up in the first place.
Yes. Step 5 is pairing better pricing with operational tweaks.
Because you have to justify the cost.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to give the client a reason to pay those sustainable rates. The source emphasizes that operational tweaks aren't about finding one magic bullet. It's about the aggregation of marginal gains.
Little things adding up.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah?
Let's look at idle time. If a truck arrives at a customer's distribution center and sits with the engine running for 4 hours waiting for a loading bay to open.
Which happens all the time.
That truck is burning diesel, the driver is burning legal driving hours, and it is generating zero revenue.
Why does that even happen so often? Why wouldn't a warehouse just load the truck immediately?
Often it's due to poor supply chain synchronization. The warehouse scheduling is just chaotic, or they require live loading instead of using drop and hook trailer.
Drop and hook being where a driver just drops an empty trailer and immediately hooks up a preloaded one.
Exactly. So a turnaround strategy requires the transport company to actively manage these bottlenecks, sometimes even penalizing clients for excessive delays to keep the asset moving profitably.
The guide also hammers heavily on load planning to reduce empty kilometers.
Oh, an empty truck is the ultimate loss-making operation.
Right.
In logistics, you have a head haul that's the outbound trip, where you are carrying a paying client's freight.
Okay.
But once that is delivered, the truck has to come back. That return trip is the backhaul.
And if there's no freight for the return trip?
Then, if dispatchers fail to secure a backhaul load, that truck might drive 500 kilometers empty. You are paying for the fuel, the driver, and the wear and tear, and you are literally hauling air.
That's agonizing.
So optimizing load planning to match outbound freight with return freight drastically dilutes your cost per kilometer.
You also have to strengthen preventative maintenance, according to the guide. Because a truck breaking down on the side of the highway doesn't just cost you a towing fee.
No, it costs you the relationship with the client whose freight is now sitting on the side of the road.
Right. And this touches on a fascinating psychological component about customers that the source brings up. When you pair fair pricing with highly efficient, reliable operations, clients actually value that boundary.
They absolutely do, because clients want stability in their own supply chains. A transport partner who goes bankrupt tomorrow because they underprice their services is a massive operational risk for the client.
Right. Finding a new logistics partner overnight is a total nightmare for them.
Exactly. Many sophisticated customers will accept fair, mathematically sound rates for long-term service stability. They understand they are paying for reliability and peace of mind.
So what does this all mean? Let's say a distressed company does everything right.
Okay.
They stabilize the immediate cash flow, they calculate their true cost per kilometer, they fire the toxic clients, they implement fuel adjustment mechanisms, and they optimize their backhauls.
The operations are now lean and profitable.
Right, but there is a massive ghost of past mistakes still looming over the yard, the historical debt.
Ah, yes. Step 6, restructuring debt. The debt is always the heaviest anchor in logistics. Even if your daily operations are suddenly profitable, the historical debt burden can still pull the company under.
The text mentions heavy asset funding and short-term credit. When we say heavy asset funding, we're talking about the massive multi-year bank loans required to buy a fleet of commercial trucks, right?
Yes, those big capital investments.
And those fixed monthly amortization schedules don't pause just because you are executing a turnaround strategy.
They certainly don't.
How can a distressed company possibly get its creditors to back off and give them the breathing room to recover?
This requires actively restructuring the debt. When cash flow has been under heavy pressure for months, the existing debt structures often become mathematically impossible to sustain.
Right.
The margins you are generating today simply cannot cover the massive installments agreed upon, 3 years ago. So you have to engage with the creditors to explore extending the repayment terms.
Which lowers the monthly installment.
Exactly, or consolidating various obligations.
But put yourself in the shoes of the bank for a second. Why would they agree to lower your monthly payment? What stops them from just sending the repo teams to take the trucks?
It's a fair question, but repossession is actually a bank's least preferred outcome.
Really?
Oh, yeah. If they repossess a fleet of used commercial trucks, they now have to store them, secure them, and try to auction them off in what is usually a down market. They often recover only pennies on the dollar.
Oh, so it's a massive loss for the creditor, too.
Huge loss. They would much rather keep the asset working and generating cash, even if it takes longer to get paid back. But the crucial insight here is how you approach that conversation.
Right. You don't just call your loan officer and beg for more time.
Never. And you certainly don't go silent. Silence is a creditor's absolute worst fear.
Because they just assume the worst.
Exactly. When a bank hears nothing from a struggling client, that is when they initiate hostile recovery processes. But, as the Greystride guide explains, creditors are incredibly willing to cooperate if they are presented with a credible, data-backed turnaround plan.
It completely changes the dynamic of the conversation.
Completely.
Like if a logistics owner walks into the bank and says, look, we were bleeding cash, but here is our audit. We identified our loss-making routes and eliminated them. We implemented fuel surcharges. We reduced our empty kilometers by 15%.
It shows control.
Right. Based on these new operational efficiencies, here are our revised cash flow projections. We can't pay you $10,000 a month anymore, but we can sustainably pay you $7,000 a month, and here is the mathematical proof.
Yes. The bank looks at that plan and realizes the leadership team is actually in control. They know their numbers intimately.
They aren't just guessing.
Right. It proves that the business is regaining stability, which turns an adversarial standoff into a collaborative restructuring. A plan is the ultimate reassurance for a nervous creditor.
Which sets up the final piece of the puzzle perfectly. Step 7. Because once you survive the immediate crisis, you have to build a clear roadmap for the future.
Yes, moving from reactive firefighting to controlled strategic growth.
A successful turnaround doesn't end when the immediate fire is out.
Not at all. You have to create long-term armor for the business. The guide outlines establishing clear financial targets and operating cost benchmarks.
So you know what normal looks like.
Exactly. You need to know exactly what your ideal cost per kilometer should be, so that if it starts creeping up by even 2 cents, an alarm goes off on your dashboard immediately. You implement rigorous cash flow forecasting so you are never surprised by a shortfall again.
You are rebuilding the foundation so the house doesn't collapse the next time the market shifts. Because the market will always shift.
Fixed guaranteed.
Fuel prices will spike again, economies will dip, supply chains will choke. But with this roadmap, the company isn't just surviving, it is engineered to absorb those shocks.
And this raises an important question about leadership, too. Turnarounds fail when leaders refuse to look at the ugly data.
Yeah.
They succeed when leaders demand transparency from their own operations and have the discipline to act on what the numbers reveal.
This has been such a fascinating deep dive into the raw mechanics of business survival. To sum up the playbook we've extracted from Greystride's guide today, turning around a distressed logistics company doesn't require a miracle.
No, it requires data.
It requires an incredible amount of clarity and the courage to confront underlying problems rather than just pushing the drivers to drive harder. You have to stop the illusion of motion, figure out exactly what every kilometer costs you, set ruthless boundaries with your pricing, and present a rock-solid data-driven plan to your creditors.
It is a masterclass in confronting reality, just stripping away the vanity metrics to focus on the numbers that actually keep a business alive.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave you, the learner, with a thought to mull over long after this deep dive ends. We spent this time talking about transport fleets, heavy asset funding, and empty kilometers. But I want you to step entirely outside the logistics industry for a second.
Okay.
Think about your own daily routine. Think about your career trajectory or your own non-logistics business. If you applied that exact same ruthless cost per kilometer audit to your own life, what loss-making routes are you currently driving every single day?
Oh, wow.
What high-complexity, low-margin commitments are draining your energy and resources simply because you are afraid to park the truck and admit it's not working?
That is a powerful translation of the concept. Just asking, where are we generating motion without generating value?
Exactly. Don't let the illusion of motion bankrupt your potential. Stop the bleed, look at the real numbers, and build your own turnaround plan. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. We'll catch you on the next one.